Good morning, Doug. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am fine. I'm going to lift my mug to you, which has, in fact, a lovely Indian. It's hard to see it because of this weird background, but I bought it up at La Posada, which is near when you rode Talking to the Ground and rode around the Navajo reservation. I think Winslow is somewhere in that area or fairly near it, isn't it?
It is. We rode south of Winslow. It would have been fun to go through there and look at the meteor crater, but we rode south of that area. It's a beautiful remote area.
Yes, it is. We're very fond of going up to the hotel, eating at the turquoise room. They even accept dogs if you're a guest. So,
Well, that's nice. Well, we had a dog following us, so maybe we could have gone and had a nice meal.
indeed. So, I hear that when you moved yourself to Maine to weather out this summer, you took a large dog with you. How did you do that?
Well, we did. Well, it was very difficult because the airlines wouldn't fly him. He weighs 95 pounds. He's a big golden retriever. The airlines with new COVID rules would not fly him. So we actually had to hire somebody to drive him because, we weren't driving. So anyway, one of my son's friends earned a very nice fee for driving him from Santa Fe to Maine.
That's wonderful. David Rosenfeld, an author that you may not know, he and his wife run a big golden rescue operation, and they relocated from California to Maine. And he wrote a book about the caravan that they had to assemble to do it, and he called it Dog Tripping.
I like that.
You would enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, Old Bones came out last year, and you introduced Nora Kelly, who I thought was a wonderful protagonist. And now, January 12th, you're going to be doing a second book, follow up to Old Bones with Nora, called Scorpion's Tail. So, want to give us just a few comments about it?
Well, it's a very interesting book. It's hard to talk about without revealing things, but essentially the book opens with a mummified body being found in an old ghost town in New Mexico, north of the Jornada del Muerto Desert. Now, the Jornada del Muerto Desert, the Journey of Death Desert, is one of the harshest deserts in New Mexico. And it was the place that the military chose to test the first atomic bomb. That's where the Trinity test took place in 1945, because it was so remote. They didn't want anyone to see this bomb going off. A few people did see it and were really shocked, but it was most people didn't. So this ghost town is near the Jornada del Muerto, and they find this body mummified. It's about 75 years old. And so they ask a new FBI agent in the Albuquerque office named Corey Swanson to take the case to determine whether this was a homicide or accident or what it was. And so Corey Swanson asks Nora Kelly, who's an archaeologist that she worked with on Old Bones, to excavate the body because, it needs to be excavated by a professional archaeologist. You can't just dig it up, especially this. It's in a very delicate state. It's the I mean, it's not a skeleton. It's a mummy, so the flesh is falling off the bones. I mean, it's really kind of gruesome and delicate. So Nora comes in and they excavate the body, and they make an astonishing and quite frightening discovery.
Whoops, stop right there, right?
That's it. I stop right there.
Wonderful. Well, we're excited about having you and Lincoln join us on Zoom, I expect, even though it will be January, to talk about it. And we will have double signed copies as we always do. Now, tell me what's up with Agent Pendergast. If January is Nora Kelly, when do we get Agent Pendergast again?
Well, Lincoln and I are working hard at work on the new Agent Pendergast novel. It takes place in the city of Savannah, Georgia, and the surrounding countryside and swamps. What can I say about it? Well, let me just say that the book opens in November of 1971 with the true story of an hijacking of an airplane. Now, all of you probably, or many of you know of the story of D.B. Cooper and his hijacking of a flight between Portland and Seattle, and how he got a $200,000 ransom and bailed out of the plane in the dark, and he was never seen again. And many, many years later, some of the money turned up all rotted and on a riverbank. And so the mystery of D.B. Cooper and what happened to him has never been solved. Did he survive? Did he die? What happened? Well, that's the opening of our novel, and we have taken it in a speculative direction.
It
And
sounds,
that's all I can say.
I love it. No, it's absolutely great. And of course, Savannah is relatively near Florida, where Agent Pendergast has been hanging out for a couple of books. So that's useful. But I
That's
bet a lot of readers know Savannah really from that enormous bestseller, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which basically put Savannah on a lot of people's maps that might not have, they might not have had there before.
Well, that's right. And you know, Savannah, because of that book and its own history, has a long history and reputation for being the most haunted town in America. And there are these great mansions in Savannah that are supposed to be haunted. Terrible murders have taken place there. There's some really dark history there in Savannah, especially involving the slave trade and things like that. So this all plays a role in our novel. Both Lincoln and I have participated in the wonderful Savannah Book Fair. And so we know the city well, we love it. And we thought, boy, this would make this haunted city, the most haunted city in America, would make a wonderful setting for a Pendergast thriller. And of course, Pendergast finds himself rather in his element for a change. But Cold Moon, Agent Cold Moon, is with him, and Cold Moon does not like Savannah at all. This is not his town.
I can see that. Now, I will tell you, I used to spend a lot of time in Savannah because when I lived in the South, we would go to Hilton Head. And as you know, Savannah, you went from Hilton Head, you could drive down to Savannah, which was wonderful. But Savannah's upriver. It's a big port, but it's in fact upriver. There's a pirate history to Savannah. But the magic for us was when the kids were little, we were standing up there on the bluff looking down at the river. There's a National Trust Ship Museum up there at the top. And as we looked down the river, this fabulous clipper ship was sailing towards us in full sail. And as we looked, we could see young men and women all standing up in the rigging all the way up to the top. It was fabulous. I mean, it looked like this giant pirate ship coming towards us. It turns out that this ship was a Coast Guard training ship, and the crew were in fact Coast Guard cadets, but this was their filmable today, Instagrammable moment of arriving in Savannah. And so I still think of that. I know the city has a remarkable cuisine. It has a lot of Regency era mansions, as you say, is haunted. There's just so much to love about Savannah. But Agent Pendergast, now that's a whole new twist.
Well, we're having a lot of fun writing the book. And we're about maybe a third of the way through it. And it's due in, when is it due? I think it's due in November or December. I better get that date down. but anyway, we're very excited. It's a really fun, interesting story. It kind of harkens back a little bit to Relic in terms of the kind of situation that Pendergast finds himself in. Can't say more than that, but it's pretty terrifying.
Sounds wonderful. So it'll probably be out sometime late next summer. But let's go back and talk about one of your early books, because you've been kind enough to agree to come and talk to me this Saturday, the 15th, with author Elsa Hart about Cabinets of Curiosity, which I think are fabulous. So when you and Lincoln, way back, I can't even remember how long ago it was, wrote The Cabinet of Curiosity, what inspired you to do that?
Well, The Cabinet of Curiosity, Lincoln and I wrote my first book was called Dinosaurs in the Attic, and it was a history of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and Lincoln was my editor. And as part of that book, I did research into the Cabinets of Curiosities, which were the kind of the precursors of the Natural History Museum. Now, a Cabinet of Curiosities would be assembled in the 17th or 18th century, usually by a very wealthy Englishman who traveled all over the world. And instead of collecting paintings and sculpture like most Englishmen did on their grand tours, these individuals would collect scientific oddities, two-headed fish and gemstones and fossils and weird stuff, and they'd put them in a cabinet and invite their friends over to look at them. And these became very popular in England in the 18th century. In fact, there were some famous cabinets. At Oxford University had a cabinet of curiosities and so forth. So they were the precursor to the Natural History Museum. And Lincoln and I thought, wow, this would make a really interesting idea for a novel. A cabinet of curiosities full of grotesque, frightening, and bizarre stuff, assembled by a homicidal maniac, a serial killer in the 19th century, who was never caught. He was a Jack the Ripper in the 19th century, but his victims were never found. So no one knew that a serial killer was operating. He killed only homeless people and orphans and people like that. And so nobody knew that he was operating, and the bodies were never found. So they are found in the beginning of the Cabinet of Curiosities during the excavation of a building, a big glass tower in New York City in the present day. And they open up this old coal tunnel and find the remains of 36 horribly mutilated and murdered victims. And that's how the novel begins.
I do think that we'll explore the cabinet more fully. I think that one could say that the British Museum still operates part of it on a cabinet of curiosity display. And I've always thought the Ashmolean in Oxford really developed out of the same, but this will be fun stuff to explore. Elsa's book takes place in the 18th century. And in fact, her collector transforms his entire house, his London mansion, into a cabinet of curiosities. So that'll be fun. So let's switch gears and tell me about how your wife, Christine, is doing with her oyster farming.
Oh, she's doing great. She has a lease on the a marine, oyster lease on the Damariscotta River in Maine. And she's got about 4,000 oysters that she's growing. And she has a little boat, and she goes out there and collects them and then carries them back. And then my job is to open them, pry them open so that we can eat them. So we get raw oysters on the half shells. You wouldn't believe how fresh they are. They're just straight out of the river, and they're so good. And the Damariscotta River actually produces some of the finest oysters in America. In fact, the Damariscotta River has very large oyster farms that produce all the spats, which are the little tiny baby oysters that they then sell to all the other oyster farms in America on the East Coast.
You mean as seed oysters, so to speak?
Seed oysters, like for example, in Chesapeake Bay, the water isn't quite as pure enough to raise oysters from seed. So that many of the Chesapeake Bay oyster farms buy their oysters, seed oysters, from the Damariscotta River, because the Damariscotta River is pristine. It's absolutely clean water. They buy them from the Damariscotta River and then grow them down in Chesapeake Bay.
Wow. Well, I have seen oyster beds growing all over. Ireland has some gorgeous ones offshore. Brittany is really famous for its oysters. Trying to think, where else? Some of the best oysters I've ever eaten were at Ashford Castle, which is on the west coast of Ireland. You could eat them in the bar.
Oh,
We found a glass of Sancerre and a plate of oysters in the bar, trumped everything else that Ashford Castle had to offer in its various five-star restaurants. So we overdid it. In fact, Doug, there's a series of books by Jean-Luc Banalek, who turns out to be, in fact, somebody else, but it's a pen name, that are set in Brittany. And one of the theses of the books, they're great mysteries, is that oysters can really cure stomach ailments and dyspepsia because they are such a pure protein food.
Well, that's good to know. Next time I have a stomach ache, I'll be sure to eat a bunch of oysters.
So what got Christine interested in raising oysters?
Well, she was involved with this wonderful organization called the Damariscotta River Association, which is a nonprofit that owns a lot of land along the Damariscotta River that's used, people hike and use that land. It's beautiful land. And the Damascotta River Association had an oyster lease, and she volunteered to work it, to help them work it. And she got really interested in it. And so she went out and got her own oyster lease. It's a recreational lease, so that her ability to sell the oysters is limited and how many she can raise is limited. But I mean, she's got 4,000. So, we're not really limited. Um, uh, and she doesn't sell her oysters. We give them away or we eat them ourselves. So
Oh, I can see that would be a compelling reason to go back to Maine, but you have a whole family situation there. What do you do in Maine other than work on your novels? Do you kayak or boat, or what do you do?
we have kayaks. We go out. We have ocean going kayaks, so we go out in the ocean on our kayaks. I have a boat. It's a motorboat. It's a 25-foot Parker, and that's a wonderful boat. We often go out for like an afternoon cruise. Sometimes we go out overnight, and I can hang a grill off the side of the boat. We grill our food and make coffee in the morning. It's really wonderful. We throw out an anchor on some uninhabited island. Like yesterday, we went to an island and we dropped anchor. We swam into the beach. We hung out on the beach. We went hiking on the island. It was beautiful. And so that's what we do with our time in Maine. We have to shelter, we're with this COVID pandemic, we can't really go out to eat or see too many friends or anything like that. So we're kind of thrown to our own devices. We're taking care of my wife's father, who is 90 years old today, and he's living with us. And so we have to be very careful with who we associate with, because we don't want to bring COVID back home.
No, of course you don't. So your brother Richard, author of The Hot Zone, is he up in Maine with you, or is he working somewhere else now?
He's in Maine. He's in Maine. He has a house near us, and he also has a very primitive house on an island off the coast of us. And he's spending a lot of time out there. It's a house with no electricity or running water or anything, but it's kind of a rough house for island living. And so he's having a good time up here. He's on sabbatical. He's not working on anything right now.
Ah, I was going to ask you that, but there we go. So I really miss going to Santa Fe. I mean, I know you're in Maine, having left Santa Fe. I wish that I were in Santa Fe, having left Scottsdale, to at least have a relief from this unending parade of days over 110. It's been ghastly.
That's terrible. Well, we've had some 90-degree days in Maine, which is absolutely never happened before. I mean, everyone's shocked. And we're right on the ocean. I mean, it's never 90 degrees here. It's usually too cold, even in the summer. So it's pretty shocking, the heat that we're getting.
Well, Santa Fe, to all purposes, really for us, is largely shut down. The opera, the chamber music, most of the restaurants. And I think the governor of New Mexico has been very prudent, in discouraging people from coming in. So we have stayed here, where we're actually being very cautious ourselves. And it'll be interesting to see all of the author events, which are legion, coming our way, are going to be virtual. I think certainly through January, and then maybe everybody will reassess and see where we are. But you know what I miss, and I'm sure you do too, because you've done so many interesting expeditions. This is the longest I think that I have been in one place in Scottsdale since I came here 30 some years ago. I have sort of itchy feet, but on the other hand, I didn't feel comfortable doing anything. How are you handling the not travel part?
Well, it must be hard for you, Barbara, because you are an inveterate traveler. You're one of the most traveled people I've ever met. I mean, the places you've been are fabulous. So I really do feel for you being stuck in one place. Well, for me, it's been a good working environment. I've been able to get a lot of work done. Not having to travel has been disappointing. We had to cancel all kinds of events. I was going to be going to be a speaker at the West Virginia Book Festival. We had to cancel that. I had all kinds of wonderful book programs scheduled, writers conferences I was going to go to. And of course, I really miss going to the Poison Pen bookstore, which is my favorite venue of all. I love coming out to Scottsdale and seeing you and doing events at the bookstore. You have such wonderful, wonderful, it's always the best audience at your bookstore. They're just the best people. I shouldn't say that maybe, but anyway, they are. They're just wonderful. So I'm hoping that maybe we'll get a vaccine and maybe at the last minute I'll be able to go there in January. Who knows? If not, hopefully during the summer when we publish the next Pendergast book.
Right. Well, you haven't mentioned that a key factor in your liking to come to Scottsdale are the fabulous dinners that you and I go out to. So.
Oh, it's fabulous at the Palm, or at what was it? What is the name of that?
It's called Virtue on a craft.
Virtue, yes.
Yeah, you know, I miss going to Virtue even more than I miss traveling. It's very hard, and I feel so for restaurants who, you know, we're able to run the store without having in-store shopping, at least right now, although I'm pretty sure that we will go back to it this fall. But Arizona was in a very bad place, and while it might be somewhat improving, I don't think we're there yet. But I really do feel for prudent restaurants. Unfortunately, there are a lot of not prudent restaurants and patrons and bars and so forth that have led to a lot of the problem. But yeah, you're right. I think the vaccine will make the difference. And, you know, we've arranged for you and Lincoln to both sign the Scorpion's Tail. And so if you can come at the last minute, it'll be great. And if you can't, we'll do it this way. Have any of the writers' engagements that you have any of those moved to an online conference or workshop instead?
Yes, some of them have. In fact, just last evening, we did a special support. It was a whole event for Collected Works bookstore in Santa Fe, which it's a bookstore you know well, and we're trying to help support our local bookstore. And we had 23 writers who were on a Zoom presentation, all introduced. We were all introduced by Allie McGraw, who is a resident of Santa Fe and a really fine human being. And we talked, and we talked about writing and all kinds of different things. Some people read their books, but you know, Santa Fe and New Mexico in general is a very literary community. So there are all kinds of wonderful writers there. And so we were all on this call to support the bookstore, and hopefully they were able to raise some money from it.
Well, I hope so too. It is a wonderful bookstore and heavily dependent upon tourists in the summer. So that's a blow. So before we end, tell me a little bit about the Authors Guild. You're serving, or at least have been, last I talked to you, as president of the Authors Guild. What is, you know, what are you seeing happening for your members, and how are you helping them?
Well, it's been really difficult. Yes, I'm the president of the Authors Guild, and it's been really hard on authors of the pandemic. Authors like me, I'm not affected. You know, I have an audience already, but where it's really hurt are first-time authors and struggling authors who are struggling to find an audience, with book tours canceled, with libraries shuttered, with online with opportunities for promotion canceled. I mean, it's been really hard for these authors to connect with an audience. And so at the Authors Guild, we've got a whole bunch of programs. We are really working hard, helping authors connect with their audience, helping struggling authors find support. Also, for example, when the PPP program was passed by the government, the Congress, they forgot freelance authors. They were left out of the legislation. And so the Authors Guild had to go to Congress and say, wait a minute, you know, here you are providing support for airlines and corporate and financial and banks and everyone else, but you've left out authors. So we were able to get the legislation modified and uh, more more carefully worded to include authors, so that authors who were losing work were actually able to get some support, some of that government money, in terms of loans and also direct support. So that's what the Authors Guild's been able to do. We're the largest, most powerful and oldest authors organization in the United States, and we have a lot of friends in Congress on both sides of the aisle. We're non-political, and we are able to do a lot for authors during this pandemic. But boy, it's really been tough for authors, and it's been super tough for bookstores. I mean, you know, bookstores like yours, you're probably in a better position than many because you have such a strong online presence already, but a lot of bookstores simply haven't been able to do what you've been able to do in building up that online presence, and they're just suffering, shuttered, and unable to, hardly able to pay the rent.
Well, it certainly is a difficult time. I find it very hard to say no to any author who wants to do something. I think we're doing events with 54 authors in August, and it's looking even bigger going into the fall. Oftentimes we put them together in order to create, some kind of a program and give them a break. It's not possible to monetize them all, particularly authors publishing in paperback as opposed to the hardcover. You can't really ship paperbacks to authors. There's too much damage and so forth. But we're doing our best to, I think of it as a public service. You're right that we were prepared for this for the last 20 some years because we did have a big online presence. We just had to learn Zoom. But we always, for decades, we have put our events online, even if they were live in the bookstore. And as you know, Lincoln has joined us for many, many books since 2012. In fact, you've been in the store and Lincoln's been in the store, but traveling to us across the internet onto a video screen. So, every bookstore is defined by its community. And Scottsdale's a huge tourist destination. So it forced us to become this kind of a bookstore from day one because there weren't enough local people to support one. But that's hugely different than many major bookstores, which are embedded in their local community, like the Collected Works, as you mentioned. It's a Santa Fe bookstore.
Yeah, it's really tragic in my view. And I speak not just as an author, but also as president of the Authors Guild, that Amazon is seeing record profits. Jeff Bezos' personal wealth during the COVID pandemic has gone up by $57 billion. Meanwhile, bookstores are going out of business. Publishers are hurting. Authors are hurting. And Amazon continues to squeeze publishers, continues to chisel every dime they can out of publishers and put bookstores out of business. It's an absolutely shameful thing. Amazon does not need the money. Jeff Bezos does not need more billions of dollars. And they've used the COVID pandemic, misused it as a way to increase their market share and chisel publishers and authors even more. And it's really, really a tragedy. And I think the Authors Guild is going to start speaking out about this because it's just not right.
It is indeed a very difficult thing. I do think that some bookstores have actually benefited in the sense that they have been more able to serve their community. Again, as I say, it all comes down to location. It's like the old thing with restaurants, location, location, location. It depends a great deal on the community that's around you. But as other social services and meeting places have been fractured or closed or rendered obsolete, bookstores, interestingly, have become a real community gathering place. And many bookstores have chosen to become very active, active in social issues, active in politics, active in community services. And so in a way, this may be an opportunity for those bookstores that are positioned for it. But overall, I agree with you that the Amazon landscape, and it's not just Amazon. Costco sells books, Target sells books, they all have a major corporate financing and backing and are able to do things with publishers deals that a regular bookstore just can't do.
Well,
But
it isn't right that a minority-owned struggling bookstore in some city has to pay more for books than Amazon, for the books they sell. I mean, it just is not right. And it isn't just bookstores being hurt, but authors are being hurt directly by it because publishers, they're a business. And the only way they can make money, they're trying to run a business. And so when they're squeezed by Amazon, they turn around and take it out of authors. So the authors are really the ones paying for Amazon's greed, and it's just not right. I mean,
well,
your bookstore is you're a brilliant businesswoman, and you're running this beautiful bookstore that has supported authors. I'm so grateful because from the very beginning, when I was a struggling unknown author, you had beautiful book signings for me, and people came. And I mean, I think you've certainly done more for me than any other bookseller, in the country times 10 or 1,000. And also your advice has been very helpful to my career. So I'm very grateful. But I do think that Amazon is not a socially responsible company, especially during the pandemic. I just don't think that this is a time for them to be asking for more money, chiseling publishers, squeezing them harder and harder when everyone's struggling.
well, I do think you should talk to your friends in Congress and all, because uh, other countries have regulated Amazon and um, reduced that disparity. England, when I started the Poison Pen in 1989, England still had a net book agreement, which meant that Main Street stores and big stores all bought from publishers on the same terms. And there was one publisher, who I won't mention, who finally broke the net book agreement and allowed discounting in. And the minute you allow unregulated discounting, which is, the whole way America operates, you create these enormous disparities. The EU has really pushed back. And I find it interesting that in France, for example, not only do they regulate um, I'm trying to remember how it all goes, but they won't even allow free shipping, because free shipping gives Amazon such an advantage. So they try to protect their Main Street, as we would call it, High Street, as the British would call it. I'm not sure what the French call it now that I think about it. They try to protect those local smaller businesses from the larger corporations. But Congress has never been willing to regulate anything like that. So who knows? Maybe some equivalent of Standard Oil will come along. Or I remember when the government broke up AT&T as a telephone monopoly. So we'll see. I agree with you. I think it has way too much power, and it keeps, like an octopus, it keeps spreading its tentacles into all kinds of businesses. I mean, insurance, groceries, whatever. It's not just about books. Anyway, enough about Amazon. It's lovely to talk to you. I'm really excited about your joining us on Saturday. I'm a huge fan of Elsa Hart and her 3 Chinese mysteries set in 18th century China, when there's kind of a librarian at the emperor's court who's fallen out of favor, and a new technology has arrived in China, which was as startling then as some of our new technology today. And I find it interesting. She's gone off into the 18th century cabinets of curiosity. She has an inquiring mind. So I
Yeah.
think you really enjoy her. So I will see you on Saturday, the 15th at 5 o'clock your time, 2 o'clock our time.
Very good. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to reading the book. It sounds fascinating.
It truly is, Doug. So thanks for your time, and love to Christine and your family. And I'm going to be thinking about oysters the entire rest of the day.
Well, thank you, Barbara. It's always great to talk to you.
You bet. Bye.